Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Heartbeat, your daily Inter Miami podcast. I'm your host, Scotty Grays, and today we are talking about the Supporters Shield, where we're at, and more importantly, the 5 most important games for us to get to this point. We are, at this point, the overwhelming favorites to win the Supporters Shield. Inter Miami sitting on 53 points through 25 games played. The other 4 teams that are really in contention, the LA Galaxy sitting on 49 points. We have a game in hand on them. FC Cincinnati coming off 3 straight poor results, sitting on 48 points. Even on games, LAFC does have a game in hand, but 6 points behind. And the Columbus Crew, 2 games in hand, but a significant 10-point difference. So Inter Miami, against the teams that they have to go up against, is in a good spot. We still play FC Cincinnati this season. We still play the Columbus Crew this season. But based on the results of the last week and a half, Inter Miami now has a multiple game edge on both of those teams. Inter Miami is now, after Saturday night's run of games, the only team in MLS that controls its own destiny to the Supporters Shield. And it's the first time all season that you could say that about any team. There are 9 games remaining in the MLS regular season. We are going to take this month-long break for the Leagues Cup. The next potential game is, I believe, August 24th. That game would be against FC Cincinnati, but if either Inter Miami or FC Cincinnati get to the semifinal round of the Leagues Cup, that game would be postponed, and so then the next game would be August 31st. So there is a significant gap now between where Inter Miami is and where the MLS is and where we're going to be when we kick back off. And of course, momentum could change. Of course, whatever happens during the Leagues Cup is going to be momentum building or momentum killing. And I know there's this sense of let's just go out early and get rest so that we can be at our best for the second half of the season, the last 10 games of the season. But ultimately, if you do that, you could lose some momentum. You might not get the rest that you want, and ultimately, it could end up being a bad situation for any team that decides to do that or, goes out early. And of course, Inter Miami is going to want to win this trophy as the defending champions, and so on and so forth. But today, actually, one other thing I wanted to mention is the Leagues Cup is later this season than it was last year. Inter Miami, at the end of the Leagues Cup, right, we went on that crazy run. We added Messi, we added Busquets and Alba and Gomez, and we won the Leagues Cup. After that game, after that tournament, we still had 12 games remaining in the season. This season, we only have 9 games left, and so the number of games remaining is significantly fewer. I think last year it was partially that the tournament was a little bit earlier. The first game of the tournament starts July 27th this year. Last year was July 21st. But also Inter Miami had a few games that they had to reschedule to later parts of the season because of that Open Cup run we had last season. So there is not quite as many games left, and Inter Miami in a really good position. All these other teams have played similar number of games and not in the best form. Of course, they could build that over the Leagues Cup. Right, we could be in a very different world. LAFC bringing in Olivier Giroud. All of these teams could be adding pieces in the transfer window. FC Cincinnati, another team that looks like they could add some bulk in defense. But Inter Miami in a really good spot right now. And if they can pick up where they left off at the end of August, they're gonna have an excellent chance to not just win the Supporters Shield, but they could make a run at the all-time MLS record. They have 9 games left. They would need 21 points. So win 7 of 9, and Inter Miami would break the all-time MLS record. Anyways, in today's episode, I wanted to go back through the season and pick out a few games that really catapulted us to this moment. And so I picked out 5 games, my 5 most important games, and I think these are the 5 that led us to this point. If things go a little bit differently in these games, and some of these are because of context, some of these are because of how the game played out, but if things had gone a little differently, Inter Miami could find themselves in a much worse spot in the table and not really be competing for the Supporters Shield, or certainly not be the favorite. And so I went back through the season. I picked 5 games that I thought were instrumental, both because of something we changed in that game, because of how that game played out, because of the context around that game. And these are the 5 that I came up with. The first is our trip to DC United early on in the season, this came on March 16th. Inter Miami was coming off a win against Nashville in the first round of the CONCACAF Champions Cup. That was the midweek game. And so we had played a lot of games in a short amount of time. We were rotating players. The previous weekend, we had lost to Montreal at home, and that was a game without Messi. And the reason I picked this game was because of the entire Lionel Messi, Inter Miami can't win without Messi. That storyline that had existed all the way since last season had continued early on in this season. We didn't have him in that game against Montreal, and we lost. And so this ended up being the first win that Inter Miami got without Lionel Messi this season. Suarez also needed a rest, so he came off the bench in this game. And ultimately, going on the road, getting a win away from home without your best player, with your second best player coming off the bench, it was, I think, a hugely important game for Inter Miami from a confidence perspective. And it didn't start out great. In the 13th minute, Jared Stroud scored an early goal, and Callender had to make some really big saves early in the game. Christian Benteke had a couple opportunities to increase the lead for DC United, but ultimately it was a huge play in the 24th minute from Redondo, big hustle play that led to a Leo Campana goal in the 24th minute. And then in the second half, there was this big moment in the 72nd minute where there was a cross in from DC, and it gets stopped, but part of it comes off of Aviles' hand in the box, and then Inter Miami goes the other way in transition, and Campana and Suarez combine to score a goal. And the VAR went back and looked at it, and ultimately, it was a huge swing, because if they had given a handball on Toto Aviles, it would have wiped away our goal and it would have given them a penalty. Ultimately, VAR decides not to give the handball on Aviles. Inter Miami gets the 2-1 lead, and then they put it away in the 85th minute. Luis Suarez gets the ball, kind of fluffs it, and it looks like he wastes the opportunity, but he kind of takes a step back, turns around, and just floats one over the goalkeeper. Certainly the goofiest goal of 2024 so far, and Inter Miami get a 3-1 win. I thought this was really important because it showed the team that we could win without Lionel Messi. It showed the team we could win without Luis Suarez starting. It showed the team that a little bit more of depth, down the depth chart, and we could still get the results we needed. It was also in the midst of our first round of the CONCACAF Champions Cup, and so we were rotating, and we hadn't quite figured out the perfect recipe to get results. And ultimately, we get the result on the road, and that was a big win, 3 points for Inter Miami. The next game was about a month later. That was our last win for quite some time. And so the next game I picked, April 13th at Sporting Kansas City. Again, the DC United game happened the very next week. It's international break. We go on the road to New York Red Bulls, and we kind of get beat up in the rain. The following week, we have an NYCFC at home game where we play better, but we can't quite get the winner, and we get a draw there. Then we play Monterrey. We have the red card late. We lose at home 2-1. All of this was without Lionel Messi, who was injured at this point. That weekend game, we get the Colorado Rapids at home. Messi comes on in the second half, and we absolutely blow them out in the second half. But Colorado gets a late equalizer, and we drop points there. And then the following midweek, we go on the road to Monterrey, and Messi's healthy, but we really limp out of that tournament. We get beat up in Mexico, and ultimately it was kind of a shameful performance. Inter Miami did not set themselves up to succeed. Tata Martino made no substitutes, and we kind of got beaten up and run off the pitch in that game. And I thought there was some real soul searching to do after that game, and I thought Inter Miami really needed to decide what they wanted their season to look like. And a bounce back game in their very next opportunity, which came at Sporting Kansas City that weekend, was ultimately the moment to prove whether you're going to be one of the best teams in the league or if you're going to whimper out when things don't go your way. And we weren't quite sure what the mentality of this team was at that point. And going into this game at Sporting Kansas City, they moved it to the Chiefs Stadium at Arrowhead, 72,000 people. It felt like a celebration game, a big, momentous, special moment in MLS. And ultimately, Inter Miami doesn't get off to a good start. In the 6th minute, Cello Weekend has a bad turnover, and it results in an Eric Tommy goal for Sporting Kansas City. In the 18th minute, Messi and Diego Gomez do get the equalizer. Messi with an incredible vision, an incredible pass, and a great run from Diego Gomez, who puts it in the back of the net for the equalizer. 51st minute, Messi has this crazy shot. I mean, I think this might be my favorite shot from Messi all season, or hit my favorite goal from him, because from 7-8 yards outside the box, just hits a screamer, but it's a knuckleball, and it just gets over the stretch of Tim Melia, the goalkeeper for Sporting Kansas City, but still ducks under the goal for the 2-1 lead for Inter Miami. Really, really impressive shot. We get this scene of Lionel Messi with the fist pump in the air after that game, and after that moment, and it was really awesome. But ultimately, Sporting Kansas City comes back and equalizes in the 58th minute. And think back to some of the games I just described in this process right before this NYCFC game. We were the better team, but we ended up with a draw. Colorado Rapids, we were the better team, but we ended up with a draw. And it feels like we might be heading for that situation again. The team hadn't won in a month. And it was tough times. But in the 71st minute, Diego Gomez has one of his crazy impressive defensive moments and creates a turnover high up the pitch, and then puts in an excellent ball for Luis Suarez, who gets the tap in. Inter Miami wins that game 3-2. And ultimately, it was an incredible game, an incredible result. But most importantly, it was the context that we hadn't won in a month, and we had to do something to get back to winning ways. We had just gotten beat up in Mexico, and it was about deciding what this team was going to be moving forward. And I thought they responded really well, and they went on a nice 6 or 7 game win streak. I think they won 6 in a row, won 7 out of 8, and really established themselves as one of the best teams in the league. The next game was May 18th against DC United. This was the home leg. We had already beaten DC on the road. And listen, we were starting to play teams for the second time. And so they were getting an opportunity to react to the first time we played them, change things up. And we certainly saw a different game plan from DC United in that second game than we did in the first game. And there was an absolute downpour for about 15 minutes in the first half. And Jordi Alba looked miserable, and Luis Suarez didn't look like he was having any fun. And we couldn't convert. I know Kramaski had a chance early, but ultimately we were just not very good in this game. And I remember thinking in about the 70th minute, I was sitting in my living room watching this game, and I was thinking, Leo Campana should be out in this game. I thought this game was calling for just a true target man in the middle of the box for us to put balls into. And Tata Martino doesn't bring him on, doesn't change much. Finally, Campana comes on in the 91st, 92nd minute. And his first touch is the game winner. As you guys may remember, 94th minute, a ball over the top from, I believe, Busquets. Campana makes a curved run around Luis Suarez, creates some space for himself. And his first touch of the game is to collect the ball. And his second touch is to fire it past the keeper, up and over, and then down again, off the crossbar and in. It was an incredible goal. And the reason why I wanted to include this one is because these are the types of games that you look back on in retrospect, and these are the ones that allow you to really boost up the table. That was a game where we deserved 1 point, and because of Leo Campana's heroics in the 94th minute, we ended up with 3 points. So a huge, huge result for Inter Miami, and ultimately they get 3 points from that game and take 6 from DC United this season. The fourth game I wanted to mention was the very next week, May 25th, and this was our trip to Vancouver. It was a big road trip across the continent. And I think this one is, we're going to look back on this game, and I already am, and think to myself, this is the moment where we set ourselves up to be successful during the Copa America. Inter Miami decided not to bring Messi, Suarez, and Busquets to give the three of them the week off. It's a big road trip across the continent, 8-hour flight, something like that. And so they decided, let's just let Messi, Suarez, and Busquets rest. Don't send them. Don't make them go through the travel. We'll just go out there and see what we can do. And hopefully we get 3 points. But if not, it's just a matter of staying healthy and being ready for the rest of the season. And Inter Miami played really, really well. 38th minute, Robert Taylor cuts inside and whips it into the far post. 54th minute, Campana in transition to Robert Taylor. And then Robert Taylor back to Campana, who finds the far post. Inter Miami goes up 2-0. There was a silly foul by Toto Aviles around the 70th minute away from the ball. He fouls, I believe it was Fafa Picot. And VAR catches it. They give a penalty to Vancouver, and Ron Gold puts it away. So all of a sudden, even though Inter Miami was clearly the better team for the first 70 minutes of the game, Vancouver all of a sudden has life. They bring on some substitutes, and we have to suffer for the last 25 minutes of this game. But we do, and we ultimately get the win, a 2-1 road win against a Western Conference opponent all the way across the continent and without our three best players. But the reason why I wanted to include this is because I thought this was the blueprint game for how Inter Miami has to play without our best players, which we were about to lose for the Copa America. That was Yannick Bright's first start. And ultimately what Inter Miami did was sit back a little bit and be happy playing in transition, let Robert Taylor and Campana and these guys get out and in space and make plays happen and just be sound defensively. And that's exactly what Inter Miami did. They were able to see out the game in the second half, but they were really good in the first hour plus. And ultimately, I thought this was a tone setter for what Inter Miami could do without Lionel Messi. And I thought that was incredibly important. And then, listen, the very next two games, not great. We lose to Atlanta. We get a draw at home against St. Louis City. And so Lionel Messi and Luis Suarez kind of leave Inter Miami on a sour note. And our next game, we're thinking to ourselves, 5, 6, 7 games without these guys, is Inter Miami going to be okay? But they just go back to that blueprint I just talked about against Vancouver. And the last game I wanted to talk about was this win at Philadelphia. Inter Miami, as had been sort of their theme over the last couple of weeks prior to this, gives up an early goal. Jacob Glasses with a beautiful ball in transition to Uwe, who has a quick and early goal for Philadelphia in the 3rd minute. Ultimately, Inter Miami settles down. In the 47th minute, Julian Gressel gets his first goal of the season to equalize, but then it goes bad again. 68th minute, David Ruiz has a foul in transition, and it's his second yellow card. He gets sent off. 85th minute, Toto Aviles, trying to waste some time, gets a second yellow, and he gets sent off. And so Inter Miami goes down to 9 men against a Philadelphia team that is desperate for 3 points. Their season, which at this point has completely fallen apart, was sort of on the brink of falling apart if they couldn't get a result here. So they really put numbers forward to try and get the win. And that's when, in the 94th minute, Yannick Bright gets the interception, dribbles out of pressure, and then puts it forward to Leo Alfonso, who carries it, blows past Jacob Glasses, and then fires near post past the keeper for the winner. Inter Miami gets a 2-1 victory down to 9 men. And this was the tone setter for Inter Miami. This was their first game of the Copa America or pre-Copa America friendly, that period when we had no Messi, no Suarez, no Busquets. No Rojas. This was the first game we saw Julian Gressel go into that right wing spot. It was his first goal. It was the second game of his goal contribution streak, but ultimately it was Inter Miami relying on players like Yannick Bright, but more importantly, Julian Gressel being a creative force on the right wing, going on the road and getting a result and building confidence. The next game, they go on to beat Columbus. Ultimately, they win 6 of the last 7 games, and it's been an incredible ride for Inter Miami. This is exactly what Supporters Shield winning teams do. They win in a multitude of ways. When they're not playing great, they still find ways to get results. When they do play great, but things don't go their way, they still find ways to get results. When they're missing their best players, they still find ways to get results. And ultimately, Inter Miami did it time and time again. These are 5 games that I thought were crucially important for Inter Miami's current success. And ultimately, it's why we find ourselves at the top of the table where we are now. Guys, Inter Miami can go out and win the Supporters Shield. It was a pleasure doing this. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, I will be back tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. Let's go, Herons.